Okay, we're back talking about Amos. And so Amos is the first classical or writing prophet, the first prophet to write in the latter prophets. So we talked in the last video about the 8th century and why the 8th century is such a formative period and what's going on in the 8th century. Amos happens to be the one that is prophesying at the hinge point when Israel is at its absolute peak. He is the only prophet who began his ministry, the only one that we have actual writing from, because Jonah, you'll notice, is mentioned in the life of Jeroboam II, but we don't actually have any of his words in that. The book of Jonah is actually about Jonah, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But of the writing prophets, he's the only one to write and begin his ministry before the deaths of Jeroboam II in the north and Amaziah or Uzziah in the south. Isaiah is just a little bit later than this, as is Hosea and also as is Micah. So Amos himself is from Tekoa. So we're going to go ahead down here and we're going to locate Tekoa. We're going to get the divided kingdoms here. And we're going to go to Tekoa. So Tekoa is right here. This is Judah in blue, and you've got Jerusalem right here. And then a little bit south of Jerusalem, you have Bethlehem, and then you have Tekoa, which is in the hill country here, just basically parallel with the Dead Sea. So he's from sort of the central area between Jerusalem and Hebron. He's between those cities and from the central area of Judah. And he travels from Tekoa to Bethel, which is on the border between Judah and Israel and is one of the core shrine cities of the northern kingdom of Israel. So he's going to go from Tekoa to Bethel and prophesy in the north. So this is a southerner coming north to prophesy in the north against the northern kingdom. Now, you can imagine that would be popular. Now, it says, according to verse 1, that he's a shepherd. 7:14, it calls him a cattleman and a fig pincher. Now, fig pincher, it's not clear exactly what that means. It might mean someone who's like dealing with the figs and like going around checking how, some have suggested that it's someone who checks how ripe the figs are before they get picked. Maybe it's a fig, someone who picks figs, that sort of thing, but it's difficult. We don't know. We'll talk about the ambiguity in 7:14 a little bit later. But he goes to the north at the shrine in Bethel. And this is one of the two places where Jeroboam I set up the golden calves, if you'll remember, to prevent the northern Israelites from traveling to Jerusalem for religious festivals. So he travels north and he prophesies he begins with these prophecies, these oracles against the nations, and we'll call these owns throughout the rest of the semester. Owns, oracles against nations. And he starts with those and opens with a pretty clever rhetorical move. So we should talk about this in his approach when he gets to the northern kingdom. And actually, I'm going to open my altar because Alter's translation here should be helpful. So we're going to go altar and where is my altar prophets? Let's see if it's in here. No, that is my former prophets. And I can't find it, so I'm just going to read it out of the other version. Here we go. All right, well, I'll have to dig that out later. So, it starts. The words of Amos, who was among the sheepherders from Tekoa, which he had a vision of, in visions concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, the king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, the king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. So we got, some firm dating there. That's why we put him around 750. In Amos 1:2, he then says, Adonai roars from Zion, and from Jerusalem he utters his voice. Now, how popular do you think that statement would be in Bethel, which is a rival to the shrine in Jerusalem? He's already placing his southern cards on the table here. And the shepherd's pasture grounds mourn, and the summit of Carmel dries up. So, Adonai really is based in Jerusalem, not here in Bethel. Just telling you guys. Now, Here's what Adonai says. For 3 transgressions of Damascus, and for 4, I will not revoke its punishment. Because they threshed Gilead with implements of sharp iron, and I will send fire on the house of Hazael and consume the citadels of Ben-Hadad, and I will break the gate bar of Damascus and cut off the inhabitant from the valley of Avin, and him who holds the scepter from Beth-Aden. So the people of Aram will go exiled to Kir. Thus says Adonai. So let's take a look at what he's saying here. Where's Damascus? Damascus happens to be the capital of the kingdom of Damascus, also called Aram. So he says Damascus is going to be cut off. They're a rival kingdom, a rival state to Israel, a state that Israel's actually in control of at this period. Okay. They're probably going to get some approval there. Thus says Adonai, for 3 transgressions of Gaza, and for 4, I will not revolt. I will not revoke. Will not withhold its punishment, because they deported an entire population to deliver it up to Edom. I will send fire on the wall of Gaza and consume her citadels and cut off inhabitant from Ashdod, him who holds the scepter from Ashkelon, and unleash my power against Ekron, and the remnant of the Philistines will perish. Thus says the Lord Adonai. Well, where's Ekron, Ashkelon, Gaza, Ashdod? These are the chief cities of the Philistines, a rival to Judah and Israel. So you've got a declaration against the enemies to the north, a declaration of the enemies to the southwest. So far, so good. By now, the people who are maybe asking a little bit of that question about like Jerusalem, maybe those people are on board and yeah, right? That's what we've got going. Thus says Adonai, for 3 transgressions of Tyre, and for 4, I will not revoke its punishment, because they delivered up an entire population to Edom, and did not remember the covenant of brotherhood, and I will send fire upon the walls of Tyre, and consume her citadels. Edom has done some things in battle that they're not real happy with. But Tyre, right here. So we go northeast, southwest, northwest. These are all enemies of Israel, and also of Judah, rival kingdoms. Yeah, this is good, right? This is good. This is what we want. Yeah, we got the people on our side. Thus says Adonai, for 3 transgressions of Edom, and for 4, I will not revoke its punishment, because he pursued his brother with the sword, and he stifled his compassion. His anger tore continually and maintained his fury forever. So I will send fire on Teman, and it will consume the citadels of Bozrah. Edom. We go northeast, southwest, northwest, far south, southeast. Edom is here, and he's saying we're going. Bozrah is Teman are core cities here. He says I'm going to come in and I'm going to wipe them out. Okay, so now we've got Damascus, Philistia, and Tyre and Edom all wiped out. Okay, this is the declaration of Adonai against the enemies of his people. This is good so far. Everybody's on board. Yeah, go get him. Yeah, go get him, Adonai. For 3 things, says Adonai, for 3 transgressions of the sons of Ammon, and for 4, I will not revoke its punishment, because they ripped open the pregnant women of Gilead in order to enlarge their borders. So I will kindle a fire in the wall of Rabbah, and I will consume her citadels amid war cries on the day of battle, and a storm on the day of tempest. Their king will go into exile, he and his princes together. Okay, so if we go back, let's take a look over here. Ammon. All right, there we go. And Gilead, by the way, right up in here. So Ammon is bordering that. That's what they're doing. They're trying to expand into here. For their war crimes, here's what's going to happen. They're going to go down. So now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the rivals surrounding Israel are going to be taken. I think everybody's on board now. Everybody's happy that Adonai is declaring his judgment against all the people, the enemies of his people. What do you think is next? Well, it's Moab, of course. So I will send fire upon Moab, and I will consume the citadels of Kiriath, and Moab will die amid tumult with war cries and trumpet. Why? Because he burned the bones of the king of Edom to lime. Okay. And I will cut off the judge from her midst, and I will slay her princes with him. So now all of the enemies of Israel and Judah have had judgment declared against them by the God of Israel. That's a big deal, right? Everybody by now is cheering. Everybody, yeah, finally, our God is fighting for us. They're going to get theirs, all of these things. And now we have, thus says Adonai, for 3 transgressions of Judah, and for 4, I will not revoke its punishment, because they rejected the law of Adonai. They have not kept his statutes. Their lies have also led them astray, those after which their fathers walked. So I will send fire upon Judah, and it will consume the citadels of Jerusalem. Now, at that point, that might be pretty shocking for those from Israel, because this is a southern prophet who just came forward and said Adonai is declaring his word from Jerusalem, and then he says, and Adonai is going to have Judah and Jerusalem destroyed. By now, you might start getting a little bit more quiet. And there might be some people there who, they've got friends on the other side of the border, like, this is a little more uncomfortable. Those are our people, too. Those are our southern brothers. We don't, got some rivalry with them, but, okay. And then finally, thus says Adonai, for 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4, I will not revoke its punishment. Because they sell the righteous for money, and the needy for a pair of sandals. Those who pant after the very dust of the earth on the head of the helpless also turn aside the way of the humble. A man and his father go in to the same girl in order to profane my holy name. And on garments taken as pledges they stretch out beside every altar, and in the house of their God they drink the wine of those who've been fined. Yet it was I who destroyed the Amorite before them, though his height was like the height of cedars, and he was as strong as the oaks. I even destroyed his fruit above and his root below. I'm the one who brought you up from the land of Egypt. And I led you in the wilderness 40 years, that you might take possession of the land of the Amorite. And then I raised up some of your sons to be prophets, and some of your young men to be Nazirites. Is this not so, sons of Israel? Declares Adonai. But you made the Nazirites drink wine, and you commanded the prophets, saying, don't prophesy. So see, I am weighted down beneath you, as a wagon is weighted down when filled with sheaves. Flight will perish from the swift. The stalwart will not strengthen his power. The strong one will not be strong. The mighty one will not save his life. The one who grasps the bow will not stand his ground. The swift of foot will not escape, nor will he who rides the horse save his life. Even the bravest among the warriors will flee naked in that day, declares Adonai. By now, I imagine you could hear a pin drop in Bethel. He's gotten everybody, and this is a rhetorically brilliant sermon that he preaches. He preaches against every enemy of Israel, going around, all the way around the nation, and works his way all the way around them, even including their rivals to the south. And then he turns the finger and says, oh, don't think you're going to escape the judgment. You'll be judged too. The same judgment they're going to get is the one you're getting. That's a big deal. That's a major, major deal. And he uses this prophetic, this poetic device as well for 3 things and for 4. This is saying that the evil deeds, the things that they're being punished for, have reached their fullness. 3 things. 3 is one of those full numbers. And then 4 has gone over the top. This is a common poetic device for, 3 things and 4. 4 takes it over the top. And he then turns the attention back to Israel and says, you're going to get it too. Judah and Israel. Now, what's interesting is you'll notice also that the various nations around Israel and Judah get judged for different things than Judah and Israel get judged for. They're judged, they are condemned because of their war crimes, basically. They commit war crimes, and they're going to be judged for their war crimes. Judah is condemned for rejecting the law of Adonai, which is interesting because it kind of implies that the proper law is in Israel rather than in Judah. And Israel is rejected, not for, by the way, the sins of Bethel or Dan, not for the golden calves or those sorts of things, but rather for violations of social justice, for oppression of the poor. That's That's the big violation. That's the covenant violation that leads them to be rejected. And especially, you can see it here. They sell the righteous for money and the needy for a pair of sandals. They're trading people for money. Beyond that, you have sexual things. And it's worth noting, I want you to think about this for the discussion section. What in the world are they getting at when he says a man and his father go into the same girl in order to profane my holy name? All these other things are about justice. What difference does it make who you have sex with as long as it's consensual? Why would that count in a list of social injustice? What does this have to do with justice? That's just, who you sleep with. What difference does that make? Why would the prophet put those things together? It's worth asking that question. It's also worth asking what it means to stretch out on garments taken as pledges. What does he mean by garments taken as pledges? Think about that. When you read through this, did you get a sense of what that's talking about? Because that's an important piece. You need to understand what that means in order to get at what he's talking about here. A garment taken in a pledge has to do with loaning money and collateral. So basically, a garment taken as pledge is collateral against a loan. You've got someone who pledges that they'll repay, and in exchange for their pledge, they give collateral, and the collateral happens to be their garment. Now, the question is, who gives their garment as collateral? Who gives their clothes? And now, today, you have to get out of the mindset that people have extra suits of clothes, extra sets of clothes. In those days, they didn't. You had your clothes. You had what you wore. Having more than one change of clothes was really unusual. So if you're giving your garment, you give your outer garment as collateral, that means that's all you've got. You're going to give anything else as collateral before you give what you wear every day. And so what this means is that these are poor people who are taking loans that are predatory loans, that then they give these garments in pledge against those loans. Oh, and then what do the wealthy people do with those garments? They go to the house of God and stretch out. They use those as their picnic blankets, and they stretch out on those to cover the ground so they don't get dirty when they're celebrating their religious rituals. And he says, really? You're going to do that? It's going to be like that? You think I'm going to be okay with those rituals when you are literally bringing the thing bringing the proceeds of your predatory lending and your oppression of the poor, you're going to bring that in and you're going to worship on those things, and you think I'm going to be cool with that? That's what Amos says here. And he says, you're coming in and you're drinking the wine of those who've been fined. The excess interest and those different things, you're requiring extra things from them in that place. Oh, the wine that you're drinking in your religious rituals, that wine is the fruit of oppression. You think I'm going to be fine with that? You think that ritual is going to be okay with me? That abuse, that injustice is what has led this prophet to come up from Tekoa and declare God's perspective on this time and say, you guys, you've got a lot of prosperity here, but the prosperity is built on the backs of those who aren't enjoying that prosperity. And by your oppression of those poor people, you have sealed your fate. God will come in and he will judge, because what you're doing is not right. And no matter what rituals you practice, God's going to see to it and overturn that, because you have gone against justice. That's a big deal. Imagine the reaction to this. So he first condemns the nations surrounding Israel, and then condemns Judah and Israel for different things. And he does this in order to get everyone on his side. It's similar to Nathan's strategy. He gets everyone cheering about God's judgment of the enemies of the people, and then turns his finger and points at the very people and says, oh, and by the way, you're worse because you knew better. You had the instructions from God on how to handle these things, and you didn't listen. So you're going to get it just like they did. So major themes that we see throughout Amos. Number one, Adonai is the God over all nations and peoples, not just Israel. Number two is that Adonai demands social justice and concern for the poor. This is core. This is central for Amos. If you are not taking care of the poor, and if the culture is not geared toward taking care of the poor, God will ultimately judge. And you can see that one of the things here is that luxury, living in luxury, is dangerous. It defiles. It makes a person impure, because when you're stretching out on these different things, when you're taking the proceeds of oppression, when you're enjoying all of that excess that could actually go so that someone else could have enough in the presence of God, that shows that you are actually impure. And beyond that, you get to the sexual sins and economic wrongs. And all of those things are tied together for the prophet. And beyond all of that, Adonai is always concerned with the poor and the outcasts. Now, Hosea, this shouldn't say Hosea. This should say Amos. Amos connects the injustice of society to the pursuit of wealth and the neglect of God. And he emphasizes idolatry less than the other prophets. You get a lot of idolatry emphasis in Hosea, which is why that is there. I had Hosea on the mind. He emphasizes idolatry less than other prophets and instead focuses on the moral and social decline that is evidence of the people not worshiping God the way that they should. That's the evidence that the idolatry is in their heart. And in the process, he attacks the very cultic celebrations that they're engaged in. So if you go to 5:23 to 24, you can see the same thing. So if we go there, we'll just look at 5:21 and following. I reject your festivals, nor do I delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer up to me burnt offerings and your great offerings, I will not accept them. I won't even look at the peace offerings of your fatlings. Take away from me the noise of your harps, but let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Which, by the way, those are words that Martin Luther King used in his famous sermon that he's pulling from Amos there. But he says, take away from me the noise of your songs. I won't listen to the sound of your harps. I'm not going to accept your offerings. I hate your festivals. All the rituals all the religious observance that you think is making me happy, screw it. I don't want any of it. What I want is justice. Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. That's how you worship God. And this is of a piece with what you see in 1 Samuel. To obey is better than sacrifice. Amos would say to do justice is better than sacrifice. To do justice is the real sacrifice. That's how you commune with God. Those celebrations are meaningless if justice is not practiced. That's the central message of Amos. And beyond that, he says, the day of Adonai, which they're looking forward to. Adonai is the warrior on behalf of Israel. And he says, alas, you who are longing for the day of Adonai, for the day of the Lord. What purpose will be the day of the Lord for you? It'll be darkness and not light. Like when a man flees from a lion and is met by, and a bear meets him, or goes home and leans his hand against the wall and a snake bites him. Will not the day of the Lord be darkness instead of light? Doom with no brightness in it? Why? Because when God comes to judge the unrighteous, he's going to start with you. Instead of this being a day of victory for Israel, as the people seem to have been expecting, and in the midst of this continued expansion and prosperity, that's easy to believe, he says, no. Yeah, God's going to come and judge, but don't you understand? That judgment's going to start with you. He's not going to judge your enemies. He's going to judge you first. Yeah, your enemies are going to be judged too, but because you're just like them, you're going to be swept away. Don't think you have something special because you're in the covenant and because God loves you. Oh yeah, God loves you, but guess what? Because you have been unfaithful, God's going to judge you as unfaithful. And he reverses the covenantal imagery. in this process. So Amos 3:2, he says, you only have I known of all the families of the earth. You are the people that I've known. Known, again, remember, you've seen this all throughout, is a euphemism for sexual intercourse. So what's the conclusion? You only have I known of all the families of the earth, therefore I will punish you for all your iniquities. So he takes the language of election. Yes, you're the people of God. You are the people of Adonai. Great. That's fantastic. And guess what? That means that you're responsible to live as Adonai requires, or you get judged for that. And if you don't, you'll get the same judgment as everybody else. And since you haven't, here's what's coming. That's a big message. That's a big, big deal. Now, he concludes with a brief note of hope, by the way. Now, many scholars think that that's added by a later writer. Some think less. I want to bring you to what the response was when we finally see how this is actually working in Bethel. You'd imagine that this would not go over well there. And we see the confrontation then between the authorities there and the prophet. And Amaziah, the priest of Bethel, this is 7:10, sent word to Jeroboam, the king of Israel, saying, Amos has conspired against you in the midst of the house of Israel. The land is unable to endure all his words. For this is what Amos says, Jeroboam will die by the sword, and Israel will certainly go from its land into exile. Which, by the way, Jeroboam did not die by the sword, though Israel did go from its land into exile. He said, then Amaziah said to Amos, go, you seer, flee away to the land of Judah, and there eat your bread and do your prophesying. But no longer prophesy at Bethel, for it is a sanctuary of the king and a royal residence. So, okay, southerner, why don't you go back south and do your prophesying there in the south, where clearly they would be more inclined to listen to your prophecies against Israel. We don't want you sowing dissent up here, southerner. Go down south to the king down there and earn your pay down there. Implying that he's basically in the pay of the king from the south. And Amos's response is interesting. Now, most translations render this. Amos replied to Amaziah, I am not a prophet. No, I'm not a prophet, nor am I the son of a prophet, for I'm a herdsman and a grower of a fig pincher. But Adonai took me from following the flock and said to me, go prophesy to my people Israel. Now, I'm going to highlight 7:14 because I think there's a better way to render this. In the consonantal text, and rather than the text with the vowels, there's another way to read this. And actually, it's not just the vowels here. It's the way that it's punctuated. You can punctuate this two different ways. One says, I am not a prophet. The other, with the exact same word order, if you punctuate it slightly differently, and again, the punctuation came much later, says, no, I am a prophet, not the son of a prophet. And I think that's the better reading. I am a prophet, not the son of a prophet. He's saying, look, you're not talking to someone who earns his money prophesying. I'm not in anybody's pay. I'm not the disciple of some prophet in the south. I'm the real deal here, buddy. I am a prophet, not the son of a prophet. I'm a herdsman and a grower of sycamore figs, but Adonai took me from following the flock and said to me, go prophesy to my people Israel. I heard God. I heard God himself. So don't you tell me to go somewhere and earn my money prophesying somewhere else, because I don't need the money to do that. I just heard from God. So hear the word of Adonai. You are saying you will not prophesy against Israel, nor will you speak against the house of Isaac. Therefore, this is what Adonai says to you. Your wife will become a whore in the city, and your sons and your daughters will fall by the sword. Your land will be measured out by a measuring line, will be parceled up by a measuring line, and you yourself will die upon unclean soil after seeing all this. Moreover, Israel will certainly go from its land into exile. You got to have some serious guts to talk to the power players who command armies like that. But that's Amos. Amos is something else, man. Amos is amazing. If you want to read the biblical prophets, start with Amos, and you have to understand he's prophesying at the very hinge point, at the height of prosperity, and he's saying it's all going to come tumbling down, and it's going to get really bad, and it's your fault. It's our fault because of the way that we have oppressed the poor. And that oppression of the poor is a violation of the very covenant that we're supposed to be living by. And so God's going to make an example of us. That's what he says. We'll go ahead and wrap there.